Welcome to Under One Roof's Doors Open Days event. The webinar will start shortly. For those who are joining us for the first time, Under One Roof is a free independent service that supports owner-occupiers, landlords, letting agents, factors, local authority housing officers, and others throughout the sector with issues around owning and maintaining a tenement flat in Scotland. Last year, through funding from Safe Deposit Scotland Charitable Trust, the Scottish Government, and local authorities throughout Scotland, Under One Roof attained charity status, which has enabled us to hire full-time staff dedicated to working with landlords and owner-occupiers of tenement flats and those that support them. In the coming months and years, Under One Roof will be increasing the information available on our website, our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts, and through our monthly newsletter. We encourage you to share information we send out with those in your building or in your sector to help us improve the quality of tenement flats in Scotland. Today's webinar will last 1 hour with a short comfort break around the halfway mark. We encourage you to post your questions and comments into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. When asking a question, please provide your first name and a brief description of the issue you'd like to raise. If you'd like to appear on screen and ask your question directly, rather than have us read it out, please let us know. If we run out of time before your question is answered, please drop us an email with your question. Please note, the information provided in this webinar is designed to help you understand your rights and responsibilities and to understand what professionals tell you. Any technical information on repairs is designed to help you spot problems with your building and then understand quotations from builders so you can get the best job carried out for the best price. But every building and every group of owners is unique, and so are their problems, which is why the information presented in this webinar can only act as general guidance. It is not advice or a recommended course of action. When it comes to action, you should always seek professional help with anything more than a simple problem. More details and our legal disclaimer can be found in the About Us section of our website. Thanks for joining us. Let's begin.
Hello everybody, welcome to this session from Under One Roof Scotland. I'm Annie Flint and I'm one of the original authors of the Under One Roof website, and I'm really pleased that we managed to get the site going, that we after a few years managed to get it to charitable status. And that voice you heard in the background, that's our new Chief Exec, Mdhr. Mike's behind the scenes most of the time today, but you will see him on one of the videos which will be coming up shortly. We are also going to be joined by two excellent speakers who I just love talking to. Lisa Pasquale, you will see, because we have video from her first of all, and then she's going to join us for a Q&A. But we're also going to have Stephen McElhaney from Home Energy Scotland. Stephen's actually a specialist in funding and arrangements for private landlords who are trying to get energy efficiency measures put into their tenements, but he's been there for 8 years. You know, he's pretty good at answering questions about anything on this topic, and I'm so pleased he's here. He's a little bit hoarse, but I know Stephen, he manages. So the first video we're going to show you today is one which Mike, you know that person behind the scenes? This is the one that Mike recorded in Edinburgh, just talking about what we do at Under One Roof and why just some of the basic bits about fabric first, which is one of the mottos of energy efficiency, actually start with maintenance. So we'll go into that very shortly. We'll then play the video from Home Energy Scotland and that from Lisa. And then at some point, Mike, we're going to put in a comfort break, I think, and then we'll go for a Q&A, and that will be live. If you've got questions, and I'm sure some of you will have, because I recognize some of the names of these attendees, then just type them in on the Q&A. And please feel free to use the chat to say hi and to say who you are and make any comments that you'd like to make. And we're really looking forward to hearing you. Sadly, it has to be through the keyboard. So, Mike, are you ready to go with our first video?
We're now joined by Mdhr from charity Under One Roof. Under One Roof is set up specifically to provide detailed, independent and impartial advice on repairs and maintenance to tenement flat owners in Scotland, whether they are owner-occupiers or landlords, as well as the factors and others that work with tenement owners. Hello Mike, lovely to see you. The Under One Roof Scotland website is full of beautifully illustrated and articles and information, but can you tell us a little bit more about how important the tenements are and the wider work that you do?
Thanks, Hazel.
If you live in a tenement flat where the cost of maintenance and repairs of your building is a responsibility you share with others in your stair, then you already know that the challenges that exist. Historic and older stone-built buildings are a beautiful part of our national cultural heritage, but that comes at a cost, and if vigilance is not maintained by those who are responsible for its upkeep, that cost can be heavy. And it's the maintenance and repair of these treasures that we live in that makes up such a large part of sustainability. For buildings to be sustainable, they first have to be kept standing. And when buildings aren't looked after, they crumble, and in some cases, they collapse. That's why it's so important for tenement owners to work together to ensure the future of their building. Now, let's take one example of an issue faced by all owners in older tenements: keeping your building dry, looking at both the consequences for not doing so and actions that you can take to avoid those severe consequences. Now, to start with, and this may sound obvious, but it bears repeating, a dry building is a warm building. No matter how much insulation you put in, if the building is wet, it will remain cold. And the more spent to keep your home warm, the more carbon emissions increase, and well, you know the rest. So what's one way to keep your old, beautiful tenement building dry and warm? Well, maintaining the gutters. This should be a priority for all tenement owners. Replacing loose slates on the roof is important, of course, but when there's a loose slate, the damp can be pretty localized. However, when gutters are blocked, water goes all the way down the building, which prevents the stone from drying. Now, here in Scotland, stone is always getting wet. But when gutters are blocked, the water is repeatedly pushed down the specific areas of the stone facing of the building. And when it can't dry, perhaps because the wrong kind of mortar has been used, the water comes out of the face of the stone. And when that happens, stone peels away, timbers rot, and the building starts to crumble. Eventually, serious repairs will be needed, and alongside those repairs, serious repair bills. There's even the possibility of damage so great that you could lose your home. The consequences of not managing things as simple as gutters is scary to hear, I know, but it doesn't have to be this way. Now, working together with owners in your building, you can draw up a plan to ensure this doesn't happen. Now, the first action you can take is to reach out to your owners in your building about setting a meeting to discuss maintenance and repair, both current needs and future ones. Ideally, you would want to form an owners association, one that meets regularly and is set up so responsibilities are shared and don't fall on the shoulders of just yourself. Once you form such a group of some or all of the owners, you'll want to prioritize getting the building properly inspected by a competent surveyor. And if you're in a historic building, you should look for a surveyor with specialist skills in this field. Now, what you want is for them to identify what needs repaired and when, and to give you a maintenance plan covering works needed yesterday and in years to come. Now, if you can't get owners to agree to a survey, which could cost maybe just £1,000 or £2,000 between all the owners, then you can carry out your own DIY building survey and use this to convince owners that action is required. Now, the key things to look out for when doing the survey yourself are straining or clear cracks in the pipes, often visible by discoloration of the wall under the affected area caused by constant water leakage, and algae, moss, or any other kind of plant growth on the building, a clear sign that the stone is not drying out or where blockages may be occurring. Once you've identified that there's a problem that needs addressing, you'll need to report back to the other owners of the building, get contractors to quote against a proper specification, and then get a majority of owners to agree and pay their share. Now, I make that sound simple, but it's not. However, it's not close to impossible either. Check out the free, independent, and expert advice and information available from Under One Roof website, as well as our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts, on how to take action on all of these steps and what to do if other owners won't agree to critical work. That website has plenty of resources to help with the ins and outs of finding and reaching out to owners, how to set up associations within your stair, and DIY building survey templates. Maintaining tenement housing is an action that each owner is responsible for, but you're not alone. Each and every person who owns a flat in your stair has the same motivation to keep their building dry, warm, and well maintained, and ultimately sustainable.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Ewan Fisher and I manage one of the technical teams in Home Energy Scotland. Today I'm just going to give a short presentation on the support available from Home Energy Scotland for people that live in tenement buildings. Now, just in case you've never heard of Home Energy Scotland before, we're a free advice service with a network of 5 local advice centres covering all of Scotland. We're funded by the Scottish Government and we're managed by the Energy Saving Trust. Our main aims really are to help householders reduce carbon and also try and tackle fuel poverty. And we do this through a range of different activities as well. So primarily this is through our advice team, and I'll touch a little bit on this later, but we also attend events. And more recently, I think like everyone, we've been delivering more presentations like this online. And we do also have a specialist outreach team that can visit people in their home and provide more tailored advice depending on each individual circumstances. And again, I'll provide a little bit more information about this shortly as well. But each year as a network, we support over roughly 90,000 householders across Scotland as well. So in terms of how people engage with us, we do provide a range of support and advice throughout the network, depending on an individual's needs. So normally householders would contact us through our advice centre, and that's through a free phone number that's on the bottom of the slides. And one of our skilled energy advisors would take the call and assess each individual's current needs and provide tailored advice based on their individual circumstances. Now, we do cover a range of different topics, so it can be an initial call looking at general energy efficiency within the property. You may, for example, have a cold drafty tenement that you're living in and you're looking to find out about what advice there is around glazing perhaps or insulation. That's something that we can support with. We do also have more specialist teams, so we can provide advice on renewable technology and also what we would class as hard to treat properties. So if you are living in an older home that's more difficult to insulate, it's maybe listed, there's maybe some criteria restrictions around it, we can provide more tailored advice depending on that as well. And also some more general stuff. So water efficiency, I know in Scotland we always feel we've got an abundance of water because it rains a lot, but we can provide advice on how you can reduce your water demand, which can help you save money within the home as well. We can look at sustainable transport and potential funding that can be available for that. So whether that's looking at electric vehicles or perhaps looking at how you can use public transport more often. Again, that's an area that we can look at for you. And also very importantly, we can let you know about the support that's available through the Scottish Government. So generally that support can range from funding for general energy efficiency measures such as insulation, potential upgrading certain heating systems, and we can also look at funding for other things to do with electric vehicles and things as well. So there's a wide range of different topics that we can cover, and what we try and do is hone in what's important to you as a householder and based on your own individual circumstances as well. So as I touched on, we do also have a specialist advice service. So within each advice centre, we also have a team of specialist advisors who can discuss your property either over the phone or in person. Now this support, it can be offered initially on a more basic level, which can just involve discussing different options and ways you can reduce your heat loss and improve efficiency in your property, perhaps over the phone. Or it may feel that you need a more advanced level of support with a property visit where we can come out and carry out an energy assessment and model the actual energy use of your current property as it stands. All the specialist advisors across the network have completed domestic energy assessor training, and we can use this knowledge to provide you with a detailed report to outline the property in its current condition. So that lets you know, that looks at the current building fabric and gives you an idea of how energy efficient it currently is. Within the report, we're able to put together some scenarios that highlight different approaches that you can take to upgrading and improving this energy efficiency. And in addition to that, we can also help try and give you some ballpark figures to give you an idea of the estimated cost and also the carbon impact that these measures can have. So we can try and help outline what financial cost is associated, one, with installing them, and also potential savings that they can make. And we can give you an idea of the impact on the environment from a carbon saving perspective. And just again to reiterate that this part of the service is completely free and impartial as well. So as well as providing advice on for householders on making energy efficient improvements, so we know finding the right idea and knowing what to do can be certainly one barrier, as people perhaps just don't know how to improve the efficiency of the home, or there could be challenges that they're not sure how to overcome. We're also aware that another barrier to this can also be cost. So there are a range of different financial schemes on offer through Home Energy Scotland and funded by the Scottish Government, with varying different eligibility requirements. And one of the schemes that I was going to mention today is the Home Energy Scotland loan. So through this funding programme, we have an interest-free loan, again funded through the Scottish Government and administered by the Energy Saving Trust. But as well as the interest-free loan, we do also have an element of cashback, where you can get a grant towards certain measures as well. I'll touch on this in a little bit more detail in the next slide. But it's designed to try and help cover some of the upfront costs and make these measures more affordable, or through the interest-free loan part, at least spread out the repayment of these. Now, it does cover a range of different topics. So as you can see on the slide, it says funding is available from renewables, which I appreciate for this presentation today might not be as relevant, but it does also cover a range of energy efficiency improvements, such as internal or external wall insulation, certain heating system upgrades. Can also fund double glazing. So if you've got existing single glazed windows, we can offer support through that scheme to upgrade to either double glazing or secondary glazing, depending on the preference. And some more other measures such as loft insulation and room and roof, for example. There's a lot of good useful information on our website about this scheme, and I've put a link for that just at the bottom of that slide. But in order to apply for this, the best thing to do is just to get in contact with Home Energy Scotland. One of our advisors will go over the different criteria with you in terms of the funding streams that we've got available. We can assess what options would be available to you yourself based on your own circumstances. And then if appropriate, we can make a referral for you to that correct scheme. Now, just looking at this in a little bit more detail, this is just a breakdown of just some of the measures that the funding is available. But I just wanted to provide an example of how the cashback would work, linked in with the interest-free loan. So I'll just pick out two measures. So starting with solid wall insulation. So if, for example, you're living in a tenement building, solid stone, and you're perhaps looking to do internal wall insulation, we have a pot of funding, a total of £10,000 that's available. You would be able to access £6,000 of that as a cashback grant that you wouldn't pay back, and the remaining £4,000 of that can be paid back through as an interest-free loan. If the amount that you're borrowing is less than £5,000, normally the repay back term is over 5 years. But again, there's different terms and conditions that we can check and clarify for you in more detail if you're interested. The other measure that I'd mentioned was glazing. So that's something that we get asked about a lot, is there any support for glazing? So if you've got existing single glazed windows, we can potentially support with that. So for double glazing or secondary glazing, we have a pot of funding of £4,500, and you can access £400 of that as a grant that you wouldn't pay back, and the remaining £4,100 would be done as an interest-free loan. So there is some support there. And one last thing just to mention on this, within the terms and conditions for some of the more complex intrusive measures, there is also criteria just now about which installers you should use, just depending on what accreditation they have. So if you were looking at renewable technology, they would need to be certified through the Microgeneration Certification Scheme. And if you were looking at doing solid wall insulation, whether that's internal or external, just now the criteria advises that you use a Green Deal certified installer, mainly because of the consumer protection that's in place through the accreditations. But I would stress the key thing there is that we would explain all this to you if you did want to give us a call. So if you did want to learn more about the criteria, that's the sort of thing that we can provide advice on. So first of all, we've just looked at, we can help with the advice part of things. We can also look at what funding is available. But in addition to that, we do also have something available called the Green Homes Network. Now, this is an online network of householders that have been willing to provide case studies for other householders looking to install different measures. So these householders have installed a range of different technology. And if you have a look on the image on the slide that we've got, there's different filters that you can search by. So the example we've set up on this just now is if you put in your postcode and you type in, you could look to find solid wall insulation in a solid stone pre-1919 flat. That will bring up a list of the closest case studies we have to your property. The reason for that is there's different ways that you can engage with the network. So first of all, you can have a look at the case studies online on the Energy Saving Trust website, and the link for that is just on the bottom of the slide. We are also able to coordinate for you to actually speak to the householders that have made these improvements. So some of them have agreed to engage with people via the phone or email, and in some cases we can also arrange for you to visit the properties. A little bit trickier just now with COVID, but it is something that we can look at for you. The real benefit to this type of thing, and the reason why we offer this, is that it can sometimes be really useful to learn about another householder's experience, about the process and the steps that they've went through. They can tell you about the pros and cons of it, things that they would maybe do differently. So it's not uncommon that a householder would say to us, if I was installing X, Y, and Z, I would actually have done it in this process, or would have installed this measure first, for example. So the key thing with it is learning from other people's experience, and generally householders that are on this network that have agreed to be case studies, they're very engaged. They're keen to sort of tell people about the measures that they've installed. It's not just to promote things just for the sake of it. So it's not just people saying, oh, this is great, this is what we did. A lot of it is learning about things that would maybe do differently to try and make the next person's journey just a little bit more smoother. But this network, again, it's managed by the Energy Saving Trust, and each individual advice centre does have a Green Homes Network champion within the team, and they're able to help coordinate and speaking to members on the network as well. So I guess just to summarise those last few slides that we've covered, Home Energy Scotland can provide a range of support, starting with advice to assess the current energy efficiency of your property, help you identify what improvements could be made. We can look at the financial cost to these, whether that's looking at an install cost or savings, and we can let you know about the carbon impact of these as well through our specialist teams. But with that, we can provide a little bit more tailored advice depending on what level of support you actually require. And we can also handhold you to access the funding that's available through the Scottish Government. So if you are looking to perhaps make some of the improvements that we suggested, we can explore with you what funding we have that might actually help get these measures over the line. And lastly, we've also got some case studies available, so you can at least learn from other people, especially, I think that's really key for some of the more disruptive measures, such as internal wall insulation, for example. So hopefully that's been useful, and it gives you a bit of an outline as to how Home Energy Scotland can support you. As I say, our phone number is on this slide, so if you did have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch, as we'd be happy to help. But thank you very much, and take care.
Lisa, thanks for joining us. I was wondering if you could first tell us a little bit about your home.
Great. So I have a one-bed tenement flat on the south side of Glasgow in Shawlands. So it's a blonde sandstone tenement from 1901. It's a very traditional layout with a hall off the main close. I'm a ground floor position. So I've got a big crawl space underneath with suspended timber floors, and it's sort of traditional bedroom facing the front of the house, living room facing the front, kitchen facing the back, bathroom facing the back. It's normally quite cozy, but when I bought it, it was in quite poor condition. The electrics had been written off, the heating had been written off. It was a bit of a stroke of luck if I switched the heating on and it actually warmed the house. But I did buy it specifically because it was a DIY special. So it's quite a unique. Generally, tenements in general are quite a unique construction in Scotland. So they're very specific to the region. And they've got some amazing kind of features to them. So part of the appeal of this one was the fact that it had been so poorly maintained, that a lot of the original features were actually there. They were just hidden. So the original shutters were still there. They'd just been nailed shut and covered over. The original floors were still there. They'd just been covered over with a really cheap laminate. So a lot of the really good quality timber and features were there. They were just hidden away. And ultimately, what I wanted to do was show how doing a low energy retrofit would actually enhance the heritage look of a traditional tenement property. That it's not about sticking styrofoam onto houses. It's about doing a really sensitive retrofit that preserves and even enhances the heritage features of the house.
And yeah, that's interesting you say that too, because you said that it was almost secondary, the energy efficiency side of things too, but that was important as well.
Yeah, so the primary aim of the retrofit, and this is me being a bit of a I like my warmth. I don't like being cold. The primary focus was really on making it a nice, warm, cozy home for me and my little spaniel that runs around the flat. So I wanted a nice, warm, cozy home, and to see how well I could do that as gently as possible, as sensitively as possible to the heritage of the building. And the energy savings was really secondary, because ultimately, if I had heated this house as it was when I first bought it to a comfortable temperature, I would have bankrupted myself. It was easily, my gas bills would have been £100 a month minimum. So the energy savings definitely was a priority, but ultimately it was about getting that warmth in a way that was affordable and sensible.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the methods that you use. There's various aspects that you looked at and worked on, but maybe if you could focus on 2 or 3 of those and talk a little bit about those.
Yep. So one of the things with any tenement, so anyone that's lived in one knows, is they can be really drafty, especially if you're in the ground floor. So having suspended timber floors, there are gaps between them. They are tongue and grooves, so that does provide a bit of protection. But I could stand in my kitchen the first couple of months that I lived here. When the wind blew outside, my skirts kind of flew up. It was, we jokingly referred to it as the Marilyn Monroe kitchen. So it had, that said, that's a very well ventilated crawl space, so that's good. That's healthy for the building. But yeah, it unfortunately meant that my house was uncomfortably well ventilated. So I wanted to focus a lot on the floor, because ultimately the only thing between me and freezing cold Glaswegian temperatures was a bit of timber that thick in the floor, and that's a huge surface area in the building. So I focused a lot on, firstly, draft proofing the floor, sealing it up as best I possibly could, and then insulating it and protecting that insulation with a wind barrier on the underside, and that made just miles of difference. But the draft proofing meant lots of fiddly work on the floor, on the edges, to basically close everything up well, systemically and healthily for the building, so that I didn't cause any unintended consequences.
And if you could just talk a little bit about that, because with these old stone tenements, it's not a matter of just sealing them up, of course, because you need to let that stone breathe. That's incredibly important with these old buildings, isn't it? Yeah.
So what I've done is, as part of sealing it up, so basically what we want to do is make sure that the main, those limestone walls, sandstone limestone walls, can what we call breathe, which is not quite the right term for it. It's allowing the vapor to move in and out of the house through those walls, because they do naturally kind of sweat, and they allow water vapor through. So what I did was, as part of the draft, to complement the draft proofing, because ultimately that's what provides fresh air in a traditional tenement, is the fact that it's not draft proofed. It's very leaky. That's where all your fresh air comes from. So once you seal that off, what you have to then do is put in purpose provided ventilation. So what I've got at the moment, I've got half. I've got half an extract system, because I'm still a bit in progress. But I've got a mechanical extract system that basically constantly draws a very low level of air out, and it draws it out of the kitchen and out of the bathroom, draws it straight out. And what that does is it just creates a continuous flow that's quite controlled, but it means that I don't have huge amounts of draft, and I do still have fresh air coming in through vents in the window, trickle vents in the window. So I've got a constant kind of movement of air, and that makes it a nice kind of fresh environment. So in the bathroom, I did do a small amount of wall insulation, and internal wall insulation is the only wall insulation you can do room by room. So I did internal wall insulation, but I used a very specialist product that was lime based, which allows water vapor, moisture vapor to move all the way through from the inside to the outside of the property. That allows the wall to maintain a proper vapor balance, moisture balance. And the main purpose of doing that wasn't actually, in my case, to save massive amounts of energy. though it turns out that it has actually had that impact. Possibly just because I was cranking up the radiator to compensate for the really cold bathroom. But the main purpose of that was actually to take the cold surface away, the radiant effect of a cold masonry wall away. So the actual amount of insulation I put on that wall was relatively small. So if you look at the overall kind of improvement in the U value of the wall, it's not massive. I'm not, you know, taking it to passive house levels or anything like that. But ultimately the big difference is the fact that that wall previously, if you were to take a surface temperature, it would have been in winter sitting at about 10 degrees with the heat cranked on full blast in the bathroom. And now if you take a surface temperature, it's sitting in a nice cozy 22. Which, you know, in the one room where you have to inevitably take all your clothes off, that's what you want.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about also part of sustainability is to be able to reuse material that was already there. And you did some work on the shutters. Was that something that?
Yeah. So again, part of the appeal of this house was the fact that, and sort of the seller didn't quite know what they were putting on the market, because the survey had come back, to be honest, a little bit worse than the house actually was. And this is where I quite lucked out, having a bit of expertise in this. So when I was kind of looking around, I noticed that what looked like the shutter boxes being sealed up still had you could still see the hinges, and that's a hint that they're still under there somewhere. So the original features were still there. They had just been covered up with like little sheets of MDF and stuff like that, so they looked like they were completely blanked. And I thought, oh, I think all the original joinery is still here. And that's a huge bonus, because they did a number on this stuff in the 70s. They loved ripping it out and putting horrible things in its place. So I was very excited at that, and literally walked in the first day I got the keys with a wrecking bar and a bucket, and that was all I had. and started pulling things apart, and sure enough, the shutters were there, and I was like, yes, I got them. And they were in good working order. So what I wanted to do was restore the shutters, restore as much of the joinery as I possibly could, to really make it look like a proper Victorian flat. Now, the advantage of shutters from an energy saving perspective, and if you think of our big long Scottish winters up here, you know, the sun rises at like 9 o'clock in the morning and sets at like 3 in the afternoon in the dead of winter. So you've got quite a lot of the day that's actually dark outside, where you really don't have a view out the windows anyway. And so when you close the shutters, you're not missing out on daylight or anything like that. In fact, you're getting some privacy, because obviously when the lights are on inside and people are outside and it's dark, they can see in your house quite easily. And being in a ground floor position, that's a bit vulnerable for me. So having these big, huge wooden shutters that can close like that, have quite a lot of privacy. Mine are very well fitted because they're the original ones. So they close up nice and snug. And what that does is, again, if you were to take the surface temperature of the glass in winter on a window that doesn't have a shutter in front of it, the surface temperature of that glass would be very, very cold. And likewise, the surface temperature of the frame of the window would be quite cold. So you're cutting off that radiant effect of the coldness from that window. From an energy saving perspective, again, you're cutting off any drafts from badly fitted windows. So I do have, at the moment, I haven't replaced my windows yet. So they're quite rubbish 20-year-old PVC windows. But you close that shutter up and you've taken the draft away, you've taken the cold surface away, you've got a nice warm wood surface now that's in that wall. The energy saving effect is quite significant, and most importantly, the thermal retention and the comfort impact is very, very noticeable. So on the days when I close my shutters, let's say I don't have to go into my living room for a day or two, I might close the shutters in the evening, you know, be out and about doing other things. I'll always, I'm a bit absent-minded, I always forget to turn off the TRV in the radiator. And I don't have smart ones yet. So a few times I've come in, left the TRV on, and 2 days after I'd closed the shutters, come in and my living room is sweltering, and it's just held the heat in so well. And that's absolutely brilliant, is the fact that that it's containing all that wonderful heat. And one thing that was interesting when I was doing the retrofit, so I got reclaimed cast iron radiators from Glasgow Architectural Salvage. And they're cast iron radiators. You'll hear people call them inefficient. They're not inefficient. They're actually very well suited to tenement buildings if it is well draft proofed. But they're space inefficient, meaning you need a much bigger radiator versus a steel one. So usually you need a very big cast iron radiator, whereas for the same heat output as a much smaller steel or aluminium one. When I got my heating system changed over, the plumbers came around and they looked at the size of my radiators, and I had sized everything, knowing I was going to draft proof the house, knowing I was going to insulate the floor, knowing I was going to insulate the bathroom. So I had in my calculations, I'd factored all this in, even though I hadn't done all the work yet. And they looked at the size of my radiators and they said, "You're going to freeze in this flat." They said, "You need radiators twice that size." And I said, "No, trust me, I do this for a living." I was like, "I will not need radiators twice this size." And sure enough, I was right.
Oh, Lisa, that's fascinating stuff. So no, it's really interesting to see what you can do. I wanted just to thank you for going through that, and best of luck, because I know you're not done yet. So best of luck with finishing it up.
Yep, thank you very much. Yeah, hopefully just basically one more room left to go and we're all done.
Well, best of luck with that. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, thanks so much. Cheers.
Hello and welcome back, everybody. I am totally fascinated by Lisa's project, because I think if you look at my background, you can see I've got a dog in this fight. I'm living in a traditional stone-built tenement, and I think one of the things I find is just really trying to sort of work out just how you go about doing things. And Lisa, you did a lot of this yourself, didn't you? You just how easy is that? I mean, what DIY projects would you recommend people do and don't do?
Well, I'll start with the caveat that when I was 16, I built a 1965 Mustang, so I'm possibly a little bit more hands-on than most people. Yes. But yeah, and I trained as a joiner when I was in architecture school. So I've got some quite good joinery skills. I've got some very, very basic electrical skills, but I didn't do too much of that. The main thing was the joinery, and that was the big project in this one, is the fact that the floors are timber. A lot of the reveals around the bay windows are timber that tend to be the draftiest bits anyway. So this kind of played to my strengths in terms of what I could do by myself. So I'd say that the one thing that made the biggest difference, and I know a lot of joiners, especially in Scotland, will give you maybe not the most sound advice on this, but draft proofing the floor for a ground floor flat was, one, relatively simple DIY, and two, just made monumental difference. So doing the tape around the perimeter of the room, so that's very specialist air tightness tape. There's a number of places you can get it, but doing that around the skirtings, around the edge, and either putting a bit of architrave over top to cover it, or getting it behind the skirting, putting new skirtings on top. And then either using a specialist silicon sealant between the floorboards, or in my case, I used timber slivers. To be honest, unless you are really, really keen, I wouldn't recommend the timber slivers. They almost broke my back. It took so long to do. It was a bit of a labor of love, but after the third room, I was like, God, I should have never started this. So yeah, there are some things that can be done, but I say that the draft proofing, if you've got a bit of basic joinery skills, that can definitely kind of be done a bit DIY.
Okay. Stephen, if people do something on a DIY basis, can they still get funding for this?
I hate to start on a negative, but generally not. the loan schemes that you had mentioned in the presentation earlier on, they effectively rely on, first of all, recommendations that come through on an energy performance certificate to access the funding. The reason for that is that Scottish Government will look at the improvement on the energy performance and the carbon savings. That's why they facilitate the loan scheme to begin with. But at the back end of the process, you would actually submit invoices. So the DIY side of things tends to get, a lower profile. My own honest opinion, there's some key things there where appropriate, if it's loft insulation or the draft proofing, the shutters that Lisa's reinstated, etc. Even just standard draft proofing, as you've said in many events before, are relatively straightforward for a competent DIY enthusiast or handy person. So we would always, identify those first of all, because it's a great way of starting that journey to improve the energy performance before going to the expense of replacing windows or, doing the internal wall insulation, etc. It does have quite a good impact, but no funding as such. What I would say though is that as part of the loan scheme, it's split into primary and secondary measures. So if you're accessing the loan scheme for a primary measure, such as loft insulation or upgrading the heating, you can then access up to £500 for the draft proofing elements as well.
Mm-hmm. I will say that I went through the loan process as part of my retrofit, and I did use the loan to actually get the boiler and the heating replaced because my boiler was ancient and didn't even work anymore.
Well, and that itself, it allows you to spread the
really
cost.
helpful.
Yeah, it allows you to spread the cost of that and use your available funds for other things, so that you can get more done in a shorter space of time. That's the feedback we generally get, from people, by and large.
Yeah, right. Okay. So DIY, worth doing some of the smaller bits and the draft proofing, but anything else you're doing in a more major way, then it's definitely worth speaking to Home Energy Scotland, I think is what we're saying about what kind of funding you can get. There's another question that I have as someone who's trying to do things in my own home. How do we find a good coordinator? How do we know what to do first? And Lisa, I was just fascinated to find out there are actually people who do this, who will do retrofit coordination, and you're one of them. Could you just explain what you do and what your training is, and also, how people find a retrofit coordinator?
Okay. Because there aren't too many of us in the country quite yet, so they're still training quite a bit. I was the first female in the UK to get certified as a retrofit coordinator a few years back, and effectively, it's a role where we are trained to basically understand the technical risks of retrofit, understand how to choose which measures go into a home, what types of materials and systems are most appropriate for that home. Because not all wall insulation is appropriate for tenements. Not all floor insulation is appropriate for tenements. So we have to choose the systems and choose the materials quite carefully. And so the retrofit coordinator will take responsibility for the overall strategy of the retrofit. They will then kind of support the homeowner in finding a correct, suitable installer. In my case, I sometimes help people do DIY when they're kind of self-funding bits of work. There's actually someone on the call that not so long ago, I was crawling around his floor with my dog, fitting floor insulation to his house. There's sort of it's a role that's specifically designed to be a sort of hybrid of part of a sort of technical project manager. So I mean, someone like me, I'm trained as an architect and I'm chartered as a building service engineer. So I sit between the two professions. So this was kind of an ideally suited qualification for me because it means I can really just focus on the more complicated retrofits versus new build, which is, frankly, new build is really easy when you start with a completely clean slate. Dealing with older buildings where you start peeling things away and suddenly the building isn't quite what you thought it was, that becomes a lot trickier to plan.
Yeah, and Stephen, have any of your staff trained as retrofit coordinators, or have they got a kind of training they can help people to work out what to do first?
It is something that I believe the WISE Group as an organisation who deliver the Home Energy Scotland programme, it is something that I believe has been looked at, because obviously there's more emphasis on the cost of materials, just exactly what would be needed. So they are looking at it, but we don't have anybody trained up yet to deliver that level of service.
But it's on the cards. Good.
Yes.
Pleased to hear that. Yeah.
Something that's just popped into my head when Ewan was doing the presentation earlier on, he might have missed this, and I can understand why, because it is a pilot scheme. There is another loan that's available for owner-occupiers known as the HEAPS equity loan. And just as it sounds, it's based around the equity that you've got in your property. But what's interesting about it is that it can actually cater for fabric repairs as well as energy efficiency improvements. So if there's roof repairs required, repairs to guttering, repairs to mortar, the pointing, things like that, that go hand in hand with your energy efficiency improvements, you can actually access it. So the HEAPS equity loan is available in about 8 local authorities, and that includes Glasgow, Stirling, Inverclyde and Renfrewshire at the moment. It's a bit more complex process, so if people are interested in that, they can actually contact Home Energy Scotland, and there's an information pack that can come out. But they can borrow up to £40,000, so it's quite a considerable amount of money, and there's no payback until such times as the property is sold. The actual payback period, as I say, is when the house is sold, but there's the admin fee and there's lawyers' fees involved, but that's unique to each individual circumstance. So what we have is we have an organisation called Care and Repair that actually do the hand-holding throughout that process. So we can provide the information pack, which gives more detail on it, and then if someone's looking to take that forward, we can put them in touch with Care and Repair to help them through the process. But it's a good one to combine both fabric and energy efficiency.
Yeah, I think that is well worth mentioning as a scheme, Stephen. It started off being sort of restricted by council tax band, didn't it? Is that still there?
It's still there, and there's still individual criteria, to be met. So it is unique to each individual property, to each individual owner. So it's hard to put it across in a very basic, slide, to say that you can qualify for X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But we're happy to take people through it.
Yeah. I think we do have a page about it on the Under One Roof website. I think it's linked to one of our financial advice pages. Yes, if it's something you think would work for you, all of those of you out there, then do get in touch with HES and at least explore the situation and possibilities, I would say. Right, now we've got a question come in from Matt McCallum. Now, Matt is asking about, would a passive style MVHR be overkill in a retrofit like Lisa's in terms of supplying fresh air? Lisa, I think this is aimed at you, but perhaps you could start off by just explaining what is an MVHR?
So an MVHR is mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. So what it is basically, so we always extract air out of our wet rooms. So our bathrooms, our kitchens, our utility rooms. And that's basically because warm air holds the most moisture. So those are the wettest, moistest rooms. And we want to be pulling the moisture out of the house because that's ultimately what helps breed molds, dust mites, and various other bacteria, viruses, and whatnot. It likes the moisture. So we pull warm, moist air out of the wet rooms. And then effectively what an MVHR unit does is it brings a supply in past the heat exchanger. And effectively the warm, moist air transfers indirectly all that heat into the cold supply air. And that supply air then gets ducted into the bedrooms and the living rooms. So you get a sort of tepid warm air supply in the bedrooms and the living rooms, and the warm, moist air getting extracted out the kitchen and the bathroom. And effectively what that does, you can get MVHR units that recover up to about 90% of the heat. So it means that any of the heat that would otherwise be discharged to the outside, that heat gets recycled back into the building. So it's a much more energy efficient way of supplying ventilation. But there's a hitch to it, which is that you need a relatively airtight property in order for it to work efficiently. Because otherwise you've got so many drafts coming in from elsewhere, it sort of cancels out the value of the heat recovery. Now, I have to admit, I haven't really properly installed my ventilation unit yet, and I've only basically got the ducts at the moment. I was not planning on doing MVHR in my property because I was relatively certain I would get nowhere near the level of airtightness you would need for it to actually be energy efficient, or for it to be basically worth the value of doing it. Now that I've done the bathroom, fully draft proofed it, insulated the internal wall, the external wall, I've actually, the difference, so that was the one room that was left to go in terms of airtightness and insulation. The amount of energy that I've dropped since doing that, it's cut my utility bills in half, just that one tiny room. And that's just because so much air was coming through it. Now that I've realized how actually airtight I've made the property, I might actually relook at that and look at doing the MVHR, because I think I'm now at the point where I'm pretty close to it actually being well worth the money to do it. And especially now that we're looking at wholesale energy prices jumping up 25% every kind of 6 months, that's going to start paying for itself a lot faster now that we've got big energy price jumps. So that is now worthwhile looking at. But like I said, it required, I've been at this for 5 years in this property. It required quite a lot of elbow work to get the property airtight enough for it to hit that point. So you have to do the draft proofing first. You have to do a lot of the insulation first before you can then make that MVHR worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about there, Lisa, is what people are describing as fabric first, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's first
you have to do fabric first.
Get the building sorted, and it's then start to put in the fancy bits of equipment. Stephen, if someone got some help from HES, would you be asking them to do that kind of fabric first approach first of all, or would they get grants for MVHR?
Always. I'd need to look into the MVHR side of it. I haven't seen that within the.
I don't think that's currently funded.
It's available. There is, heat recovery systems for wastewater and for your boiler, etc. as well. So there are elements there that work on a similar basis. But we would always say fabric first. There's no point investing in new heating systems, new windows, etc. if you're still losing heat through walls, floors, and roofs that can be easily, dealt with, at fairly low cost in a lot of cases as well. So yes, it's always fabric first. And I know you touched on renewables, which are not really, for this audience, but effectively they only work in well insulated properties anyway. Are the work at their optimum in there. So yes, we talk about the heat loss through walls, roofs, and floors before we even start talking about replacing anything else.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, either of you, that we're ever going to get to the stage where some older tenements like the one Lisa's in would ever actually be at that kind of passive house standard? And I know there are projects being trialed, with passive 10, as in passive tenements, and I've heard some of the costs from those are pretty high for owner-occupiers. People are talking about £40,000 per owner. Do you think tenements can ever be capable of being made up to that kind of standard?
So I'm personally of the opinion that we really don't need to go quite that far with tenements. And part of the reason is actually those big solid stone walls. I mean, they're 800 mil thick. They're actually pretty good. The main issue is just the fact that they are a cold surface on the inside. So you can do smaller amounts of insulation, but they would never come anywhere near the kind of level that passive house or Retrofit would require. The biggest difficulty you've got with doing those sorts of things is the junctions between flats. And it's mainly the interstitial floors. So basically the ceiling of mine between my flat and the first floor flat. One of the reasons that the only room I did IWI in was the bathroom was the fact that the previous builders had done such a bad job and made such a hash of the bathroom they'd put in before, that I could basically reach in and touch the joist ends in between the two units. And that allowed me to actually pack them in with lime putty and protect them from any kind of warm, moist air ingress. And usually you wouldn't be able to do that. If I were to attempt to do that in my living room, I'd have to rip the whole cornice out. And, you know, that's kind of part of the reason I like the flat. So I think it is quite tricky to do it when you're actually looking at the whole building, because there are elements that once you get into resolving the interstitial floors and stuff like that, that's something where a retrofit coordinator needs to be advising, and that starts getting quite expensive and quite tricky.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, do you have any comment about that from the point of view of HES?
Yes, I mean, effectively, I mean, what Lisa says is perfectly true. I personally think the building should tend to breathe a little bit anyway. I'm a bit of a fresh air freak. But I did work with a landlord earlier in the year. I think the question really for owner-occupiers is how much money do they want to spend, you know, because to achieve these levels, there's a lot of technical disruption. You know, if you want to try and keep the key elements of tenement properties like the skirt, you know, the deeper skirtings, the coving, etc., any plaster work is very, very challenging. But this particular landlord had a studio flat out on London Road, tenement top floor, and he decided he was taking it back to the brick all the way. So there was a lot of discussion about whether to insulate the party walls, because he had a flat on either side, whether to insulate the heat loss wall to the corridor. And technically, there's not usually a lot of benefit to do that or need to do it. So really, it's only that heat loss wall towards the front of the building. And as Lisa said, she did it in the bathroom, you know, for her own property. So you could limit it to smaller areas. But this chap was definitely preferred the air tightness to it. So as well as insulation that went in, he used the tape to finish it off as well. Funnily enough, he'd taken some temperature readings for the party walls, and the surface temperature tended to be higher prior to the insulation being put on. So when he actually put his insulation, which was only, you know, negligible thickness, the surface temperature was actually slightly lower because he wasn't getting any heat transference. So that works both ways, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I think we do sometimes forget just how inherently eco tenements are. You know, not just because we're all, you know, passing heat through to each other, but also just because, you know, most tenements are in pretty densely populated urban areas. People are very close to all the facilities. You know, you're not even getting your car to go out for a pint of milk as you might be in other places. And, you know, I think that is just something to celebrate about Glasgow tenements, isn't it? Is that they're pretty good buildings to start off with, and we just need to keep them that way. So I think we're now coming just up to the end of this webinar. I did skip a question from Alistair about enforcing repairs. Alistair and anybody else who has this problem, there's a huge amount of information on Under One Roof on this topic. And if you're having particular difficulties with things, or you find the website isn't quite answering your questions, just get in touch with us, because, you know, quite often that kind of feedback is really helpful to us too, and therefore, you know, helpful to other people as well. And there's also a very fascinating comment from Chris Karras talking about a new social enterprise company that's going to be putting in insulation and other energy saving measures. I think we'll probably try and get Chris to write a small article for us at some point, so we can find out more about what's going on. But it's now 7 o'clock. We're due to finish. I would just like to thank our two speakers, particularly Stephen and his colleague Ewan, who is his counterpart in Edinburgh, and they're from Home Energy Scotland. Lisa, pout your elbow, girl. I mean, I thought you were just amazing, and it was just lovely to hear you speak, and I think it's just inspirational for people.
Thanks.
I'd just like to thank all of you out there for listening as well and having an interest in this topic. And recordings of this video, this webinar, are going to be available. We'll send that link out, and if you know other people who'd be interested, pass that link on to them, because the more people we get listening to these things, the better. So thanks and good night, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you all at another webinar sometime in the future.
Thanks, everyone.